I'm excited for today. Before we get too far into it, I do want to mention one thing really quick. There's a whole lot going on, and I know we had video announcements today and stuff like that. That was not me. I am on work mode. I am focus off right now. But somebody got a message, and it hopefully was Jesus. Just all I'm saying, okay? He really wants to tell you something today, and somehow you're patched into our system. I don't know. All right. Christmas Eve services happen on Christmas Eve. I don't know if you knew that happens every year on Christmas Eve. This weekend, or this year, is a little bit different with Christmas landing on a Sunday morning, and want to make you aware of all that's going on here. We have Christmas Eve services on Christmas Eve, and because of that, we are not going to be meeting on Sunday morning because that is Christmas Day. We have a whole bunch of families. We want you to be able to enjoy time with family, enjoy opening presents that morning. Parents, you may be up really late the night before for some reason, helping out people that show up at your house in the middle of the night. I don't know. But we really, really want you to be with us on Christmas Eve, be here, be a part of all that God is doing. That's going to be our Christmas Eve services, but also our weekend services that weekend. So make sure that you make plans to do that and be here with us. And then really, really enjoy family time and Christmas together. I know that our family is. We're excited for that. And then be aware, stay tuned. I know a lot of you traveled in that week between Christmas and New Year's last year, and you missed out on Sweatpants Sunday. And back by popular demand, Sweatpants Sunday is coming back on January 1st. So that's my teaser to you. If you planned on traveling, you're going to want to be back. That's all I'm saying. All right? That's all I'm saying. We're really excited. We are now in December. So no matter where you land on the crazy spectrum of when Christmas is allowed to show up at your house, like some people, you cannot have Christmas until after Thanksgiving. Some people start celebrating Christmas in September. Wherever you are, this is a judgment-free zone. But it's December, so Merry Christmas for everybody now at this point. Here we are in December and just excited for all that God has going on in this season and all the things that are coming up. Please stay aware. Again, if you haven't already filled out a Connect card, I know they talked about it in the announcements. We send out weekly just updates, and we want you to be a part of everything that's going on and know all the information and all the things so that you can be a part of that. All right, so last week we talked about peace. We talked about Thanksgiving, and we talked about peace and a peace that surpasses understanding. And we kind of talked about how it was a setup to today. And how we do that is to stay soaked in the presence of God. And if you missed last week, I just encourage you, you can always go back and watch it online on the YouTube channel, whatever it may be. But I just encourage you just to go back. It was a really fun weekend for me. Just to talk about what it truly means going into this season to stay just soaked in his presence. And in this season, there's a whole lot going on. Part of the reason we talked about that is because we realized that we're coming into a stressful, chaotic season. And there's things going on, but I believe that there's hope in the middle of it. And as we talk about calm in the middle of chaos, that there's hope that in the midst of it all, that we can still notice people. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is noticing people in the middle of chaos. I think it's absolutely crazy that this is the most chaotic time of the year, and we make it super chaotic to celebrate the birth of the Prince of Peace. Seems a little backwards. I feel like we should all just take the month off. This is what peace is actually about. But that's not reality. That's not what happens in the middle of it. And I think that there's so many times where we can be so busy doing things that we don't actually notice the people around us. And we can be so busy in the planning and the doing that we don't know the people. I think the craziest example of this that I've shared before, I hear that Amber and I had really good food at the reception of our wedding. People have told us it was wonderful. I know that I ate it because there's a picture of me at a table with food in front of me, but I don't feel like I remember anything. Like there was so much in that day, and again, if you went through a wedding and you have a large family and you had people there, like there was so much in that day of trying to make your way around the room and like, thank you for coming, and like that you honestly, you're like, I feel like I talked to everybody, but I didn't talk to anybody. Like I spent so much time trying to make sure that nobody felt left out, like I don't even remember who was there. And I think that this season can be a lot like that. That we're so busy trying to do the things and be at all the places that really our goal is to get through it, not to actually enjoy it. And I think a big part of that is when we pause and notice people. I think what's amazing is when we look at Jesus and his life, he never seemed rattled. Like there were times where he was emotional. He showed emotion, but never to a point where it was out of control. And there were times where he was dealing with massive crowds of people, but it never felt like he got out of whack. Like there's times where in a whole lot of people or there's a whole lot going on, like I'll realize like, hey, I'm getting a little bit off. I never feel like Jesus was off, ever. And I think it's amazing, and I think a big part of that is the healthy rhythms we talked about last week that Jesus had to make sure that he was constantly soaked. But I think there's another piece of it that we could learn a lot from. And that's not just seeing the crowds, but noticing the faces in the crowd. And Jesus always noticed faces in the crowd. Today we're going to camp out in Mark chapter 4. And you can flip there. We're going to start in verse 21 is where we're going to start. But let me give you a little bit of background because we're going to read a large portion of Scripture. We're going to read 22 verses today. And we're going to just kind of break down what all happens. But before we get to verse 21, what we see is Jesus is in this area and region called the Decapolis. It's actually a region, it's a state in the Roman Empire around the Sea of Galilee that has 10 cities in it, hence Decapolis, right? It's a populated area. What it also is it's an area that is mostly Gentile. So what we know from history and what we know from the New Testament, the rest of the New Testament, is there's Jewish pockets throughout the entire then known world and all the way through the Roman Empire. But really the culture of Judaism was right around Israel, Jerusalem, in that area, all right? But Jesus did massive portions of his ministry in regions that were pretty densely populated Gentile areas. And the Decapolis is one of those areas. And while he's there, he encounters this man who is possessed by a demon. And he frees this man of a demon, and this man starts to tell people in this populated area, and all of a sudden the crowds just continue to grow. And Jesus is like, all right, these crowds are huge. Let's push off across the lake, and let's go over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, is what he's talking about. All right, and that's where we pick up in verse 21. It says, when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered round while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed and pressed around him. So here's the picture. Jesus has a huge crowd on this side of the lake and is like, all right, let's go to the other side of the lake. By the time that he gets there, there's already a crowd waiting. Notice it wasn't like once he got into town, people noticed he was there. It was literally by the lake, right? Like he went from chaos to chaos. And these people are all around him like, hey, we heard what you did. We've heard the stories. We know the miracles that you've done. And they start to gather around him. And now he's in this Gentile part of the area. And this synagogue leader named Jairus presses through the crowd and gets before Jesus. And what he does in this moment, while everyone else is kind of clamoring, like, did you see him? Like, oh my word, this is cool. Like this person who is growing in popularity is in our region. So people are kind of going around. Have you ever seen videos this summer where Giannis went to Summerfest, right? And it was like he's got a couple pictures of him and his family, and then you see like the picture of the person that was like, oh my word, it's Giannis. And it's like there's this massive crowd that are just following around. It's really hard to go someplace in public when you're 7 feet tall. People know you're there, right? And I feel like there was this moment where Jesus steps off the boat and people are like, oh my word, Jesus is here. And they start pressing around because they've heard of what's going on, and they're like, hey, maybe he's going to do something like that here. Yet in the middle of it, this man named Jairus, who because of his position in the synagogue would have been well respected in the community, he presses forward, and what he does, we see what he does here, is he falls at his feet and pleads with Jesus. So he humbles himself and says, if you could just come to my house, my daughter would be healed. And in the middle of all of this, what Jesus does is Jesus sees him. Out of everybody in the crowd, he sees him and he says, you know what, I'm willing. What's crazy is we know different stories about people who have approached Jesus, right? In Luke chapter 7, there's a story of a Roman soldier that literally comes up to him. He's like, hey, I know the authority that you have. You don't even have to come to my house. If you can just say the word, like I get it. Like this is a person that literally, he's like, Jesus, if you could come to my house. And Jesus doesn't look at him like, hey, you realize that I could heal her from here, right? Like, I don't know. There's a lot of people around. I don't know. You didn't. But instead, what he does is he notices a person. In the middle of the crowd, he notices Jairus. And in that, one of the things that I love that I believe we need to learn from is even in the midst of the chaos, to pursue Jesus. I just wonder how many people had different things that Jesus could have healed for them in that crowd. I wonder how many people had a sick family member that were there, or an issue themselves, or something happening in their personal life that if they would have just mustered the courage to be like, hey, Jesus, like, I know there's a lot of people around. Like, I wonder what could have happened. Yet there was one person in the middle of this crowd that we see that was willing to press through and humble himself. Even though he was in a position of authority, he was like, hey, here's the deal. I don't care that everyone else is here. Jesus, I need you. And in the middle of chaos, in the middle of commotion, in the middle of crowds, that we would be people that press through. That press through to Jesus. Because there's something else that we see. Jesus goes with him. Okay, we see that. But something else happens. As they're on their way, and it's not just Jesus and Jairus, but it's this entire crowd starts to move with him. They're all pressing in around him. Something happens. Picking up in verse 25, it says, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and spent all that she had, yet instead of getting any better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I could just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was free from her suffering. And at once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, and he turned around to the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? I love the response of his disciples. You see the people crowding against you, right? Like, pick one. It's kind of what they're saying. You see the people crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you ask who touched me? Like, all of us? I don't know. How do you answer that? And Jesus responded. He kept looking to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. So here we are again, right? There's chaos, there's crowd, there's people everywhere. And now this crowd is on a mission, right? The first time Jesus steps out of the boat and they were like, oh my word, you're here. What are you going to do now, right? But Jairus shows up and he's like, can you please come to my house? And he's like, yeah, let's go. So now they're like, oh, here we go. Like, this is what we've been waiting for. And yet in the middle of their mission, they get interrupted. And Jesus stops. Now again, I would love to hear, we hear what the disciples say. They're like, everyone is touching you. Like, everyone's around. But I can't imagine Jairus already having been the person who pled with Jesus on his knees what he was thinking. Like, hey, we can't stop right now. Like Jesus, we're all touching you. Can we, we've got something we need to get to, right? My house, my daughter, if we don't get there in time, why are we stopping right now to find out who's touching you when we all are, right? And yet in the moment, Jesus notices people. And he pauses to find out who touched him. Again, the second person in the story, as we mentioned before, that pursues Jesus in chaos. And what happens is, when we pursue Jesus in chaos, he notices. There's people all over the place. She's had this medical issue that's still getting worse. She's spent every dollar that she has. This medical issue would have meant she shouldn't have even been in the crowd itself. Like the fear that she had when she's like, wait, who touched me? The fear is like, oh my word, I wasn't supposed to touch someone who was clean if I am unclean. Like there is now all of a sudden repercussions that come along with this, so that when she came forward, she was just like, man, I know. Like she had enough faith that was like, if I can just get close, if I can just sneak in there, even though I'm not supposed to be in this crowd. And yet Jesus recognized and called her out and said, hey, hold on. It's okay. When we pursue Jesus. And there's also something that hit me this week. And I want to pause for a moment, because this is where I was like, I feel like God kind of put some things together. In the middle of the crowd, I feel like there's times where we can relate. And this is what God hit me with as I was preparing and praying over this. I think sometimes it's really easy to be sucked into the crowd. It's really easy to go along with the group that's there. But I wonder how many times we as the church look like the crowd. Where we're really close to Jesus. We're within arm's length of Jesus. We're literally able to touch Jesus, but yet we're not pursuing. Like there's a whole bunch of people around that did not receive power from Jesus because they were there, but they weren't pursuing. They were in proximity, but missing out on power. They understood what was going to happen and the potential that Jesus had, but yet they weren't willing to receive it. And I just wonder how many people there were not receiving power because the intent was to be close, but not to be intimate. They wanted to walk near him, but didn't want to walk with him. And yet there's two people in this story that received their healing because they were willing to do whatever it took to pursue. Again, the song that we just sang, Everything is Changing. That entire crowd could sing, everything has the ability to change, because Jesus is here. Yet two people said, no, everything is going to change because we know who's here. How different would our lives look if our heart posture and intention was everything is going to change? Because as Jesus turns around, he literally is like, you've received your healing. I felt power go out from me. How is it that this one woman receives power by touching the hem of his garment when everyone else who touched him got nothing? How is it that Jesus recognized it? Like, part of it is, I don't fault the disciples in this moment of he's going, wait, who just touched me? Like, legitimately. Ever since we got off the boat, Jesus, people have been touching you. What are you talking about? And he's like, no, something shifted. And it wasn't because Jesus' like power meter dipped, like somebody took something from me. But literally his spiritual barometer was like, no, there's faith in the crowd. There wasn't before, but something happened right now. We know in Scripture that it's not like Jesus has this limited amount of power and he felt like the tank dip a little bit. It's not like he only has so much healing power. He's fully God, fully man. He's walking in the Spirit. He is filled with the Spirit. You cannot, just like now today as we say yes to Jesus and pray for the infilling of the Spirit, we are filled with the Spirit. It doesn't mean that when you give something out, it's like, hope I use that well because I'm not going to get it back. Like, that's not what he's saying. There's never been a moment that Jesus had not enough power, but there has been a moment in his hometown that it says he could do little miracles because there was little faith. What he recognized in that moment was the faith of a woman who was willing to pursue in the midst of the chaos. What would it look like if we, needing healing, needing a touch from God, didn't just hang out in the crowd, but literally said, I'm going to press. I'm going to pursue. Because when we pursue in faith, Jesus notices people. Those are the people that have one-on-one conversations. Those are the people that he paused in the middle of the crowd and said, no, today's the end of your suffering. These are the people that he says, all right, even though I could totally heal her from here, I'm going to your house. Because of a press, because of a pursuit that they had. So this woman is healed in this moment. And again, I feel like, and I do this, I know if you've been here for a while, you realize that I do this, like I try and fill in what else is happening that isn't there. Again, during this conversation, I just picture this being like this intimate conversation where Jesus, like, as she falls in her feet, like picks her up with her hands and says, your suffering is over, it's okay. And in the middle of this moment, I just picture Jairus like going, really glad you're having this moment, Jesus, but do you remember where we were headed? Like I love that she's getting this right now, but my little girl is dying. Like, she can come with if she wants. Like, bring her to the house. Like, let's just keep going. But the story continues. In verse 35, it says, while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, and said, your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? Overhearing what was being said to him, what they were saying to Jairus, Jesus told him, do not be afraid, just believe. He did not let anyone follow except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly, and he went in and said, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead but asleep, but they laughed at him. So there's two types of chaos that we see in this one story. One chaos is the crowd, all the people, everything that's going on, right? The other type of chaos is the commotion. Jesus ditched the crowd and said, all right, no more crowd. Let's do this. And when he gets there, there's commotion. And really, there was this part of their culture that they would actually have like professional mourners come in, and they would come in and wail and mourn. And in this moment, there's this commotion that has been created. And what Jesus does in the middle of that commotion, chaos, is he says, peace be still. Everyone out. And even when he tried, they laughed at him. I think it's important for us to remember in this season that it's not just about the number of people that cause chaos, because there's times where it's like parties and family members, and it's like an office party with spouses, and you're like, I don't even know half of these people. Like there's crowds that are there that can cause chaos. I think there's another moment that is the commotion. It's not just the number of people, but it's the attitude of the environment. That there can be commotion in the middle of an environment that creates a chaos. And yet, in the middle of it, Jesus still recognized the people. And he says, what you're doing is you're distracting the people that I need to talk to from the fact that I'm here. It's kind of their job. They were there to mourn, to be alongside the people who were mourning. So that it felt like, as people from the outside was like, hey, we don't know which one is his mom and dad. They're just all there. They're there to keep company, but to keep company in this exuberant way. And he says, no, not here. And he calms the commotion. And after he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said, Talitha koum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. Anybody remember how long the woman with the issue of blood was? It's 12 years. And in the midst of it, it says, at this they were completely astonished. Now here's the thing, the calm and the chaos. Every time that Jesus was in a situation in these 22 verses, he stepped off the boat into chaos, into a crowd of people that were all like it was celebrity status. They just wanted to be close to him. But one person's pursuit, one person's faith, and Jesus noticed him. And with that, he said, I'm going to your house. And they're going to his house. And with this, like the whole crowd is moving and they're jostling for position to get close. And like again, I think like concerts where they're just like trying to like touch a leg of a superstar or a singer, and you're like, what is going on right here? And yet in the midst of it, this lady presses through out of faith and says, I need this power that he possesses. And Jesus pauses and stops in the middle of it all and recognizes and notices a person. And then calms commotion and heals this little girl. I think a few things that we can learn from this story is, in the craziness of it all, never lose sight of Jesus. Never lose pursuit of Jesus. And in our pursuit of Jesus and being Christ-like, being like him, never lose sight of individuals in the midst of the crowd. One of the most dangerous prayers that I've ever prayed, that I believe you could ever pray, is, God, give me eyes to see what you see. Allow me to see people the way you see people. Because God will show you. And when you walk into a room of people, there will be times where you'll lock eyes with one and go, there's something that needs to happen. Or I have a word for you. Or you just need to know that you've been noticed today. There's an important command. Jesus is trying to get cornered by the leaders of the day in Matthew chapter 22. And they're like, yeah, which is the most important command in all of Scripture. And Jesus responds, verse 37, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. He just immediately goes into number 2. Like, you only asked me for one, but I'm going to tell you what happens. When you do number 1, when you pursue Jesus, when you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, it immediately leads into the second greatest commandment, which is like it. It says, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commands. Boiled down, it's this: love God, love people. And one of the things that chaos does is chaos can take our eyes off of the priority, and in the process, also take our eyes off of the individual. And one of the greatest ways to calm the chaos is to keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, to continue to pursue Him. And in that process, it's amazing what happens in the middle of the chaos that you start to see God wanting to work. I truly do believe, truly do believe that in this season, in the middle of the chaos, God has an incredible plan for your life. Over the course of the next 3 weeks of parties and shopping and all that goes on, and the baking and the cooking and the family and the travel and all that's going to happen, I believe in the midst of it, God has an incredible plan. And in the midst of the chaos, God can create incredible beauty. One of the biggest fears that I would ever have is to miss a moment that God had set up. And too often I think that the plan of the enemy isn't to just get you to blatantly disobey, it's to distract you so you don't see it. And too often chaos can distract us from what God has in store. But when we stay locked into who He is and pursue who He is, I believe that we'll see people the way He sees them. I want to ask you to bow your heads and close your eyes today, all across this place. And I want to pray a simple prayer for each of us. And that's just this: that we would be able to see people the way that God sees people. That as we go through the next season, the next few weeks, the next month, that it's not just about getting through it. It's not just about surviving to get through it. But it's about being intentional. To see people. To first and foremost see God. To pursue Jesus. Not just be around. Not just be at the events. But to press it. To press into who He is. And with that, to be able to see people. God, today, I pray over each and every person in this place. As we go into a season, as the season has already started, of hustle and chaos and all that's going on, God, that we would stay anchored in You. That when the entire crowd is moving, that we would recognize where You are in the crowd, and that we would press closer to You. And that, God, that not just about staying close to You, even though that's the biggest part of it, God, we're also filled with the same Spirit that You were filled with in this story. That we would be people that would recognize people in the crowd. That we would be able to walk slowly through the crowd, slow enough to be able to recognize individuals. And in those moments, God, that we would realize that the same person that we pressed towards, that changed everything for us, that gave us the healing that we needed, that gave us the miracle that we needed, that same Spirit is alive and active in us. that we would be able to bring your Spirit, to bring miracles, to bring healing to people in the middle of their chaos. God, we thank you that you're still moving today. We thank you that everything is changing today. And our commitment is to the pursuit. Our intention isn't just to be close, but to be intimate. God, I thank you that even as we do this, you recognize and notice us. In Jesus' name, amen.